Have you ever found yourself in a situation where a seemingly minor mistake ended up having significant consequences? Well, that's what happened to me, and I had no idea things would turn out this way. Trust plays a crucial role in any relationship, and it takes a lot of hard work to build it, but it can be shattered with just one wrong move. Unfortunately, I made that mistake, and I still regret it to this day. I'm a 36-year-old woman, and I'm married to my husband, who is 40 years old. We've been married for 2 years now. My husband is a professor at our local university, and I work there as an assistant professor. I joined the university 3 years ago because they offered a good salary and shorter working hours compared to my previous job. My husband holds a senior position at the same university, and he's highly respected there. I actually met my husband at the university when I was hired as an assistant professor to work under his supervision. He was even part of my interview process. I developed an immediate crush on him because he was intelligent and fun. I was ecstatic when I got the job working alongside him. Our roles required us to work closely together, attending classes and grading papers together. Spending so much time together naturally led to us getting to know each other better. Our relationship started with casual conversations and jokes, but it soon progressed to having lunch together and spending even more time with each other. The attraction between us was mutual, and it didn't take long before we officially became a couple. After being together for a year, my husband proposed to me, and I accepted. I enjoyed his company, and I was impressed by his respected position at the college. His authoritative demeanor was something I found attractive, and he always took good care of me. So I said yes, and we had a small wedding ceremony to celebrate our union. Our married life was going smoothly. I had moved into his cozy bungalow, and we were happily living together. Our life together was going quite well, especially since we also worked together. I was content and satisfied in my marriage, feeling like I had everything I ever desired. My husband embodied the qualities of a perfect alpha male, strong, confident, and charismatic. He had a clear sense of purpose and knew how to achieve his goals. I deeply admired his intelligence and strong work ethic. I believed we were an ideal match. However, I ended up losing him due to a small mistake I made a year into our marriage. A mistake I never thought would have such severe consequences. I deeply wish I could undo that mistake. It all began when a new assistant professor joined our university, whom we'll refer to as George. George was around my age, and he had an appealing charm, self-assuredness, and I must admit, he was quite attractive. We had casual conversations a few times before, but nothing out of the ordinary. However, one day, when my husband was out of town and I was working from a cafe near the university, George and I coincidentally ran into each other. We both ordered coffee and started chatting. The conversation was lighthearted and enjoyable, covering various topics from work to our personal lives. George was single and had recently moved to town. He was easy to talk to, and before I knew it, a few hours had passed. We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. At that moment, I didn't attach much significance to it. I liked talking to George, but I was happily married to my husband. Little did I realize that this seemingly small mistake of exchanging numbers with George would trigger a series of events that would completely disrupt my life. Over the next few weeks, George and I began texting each other. Initially, our messages were about work and our hobbies, but gradually, they took a flirtatious turn. At first, I couldn't believe it. I was sure that everyone knew I was married and who my husband was. George started sending subtly flirtatious texts, and although I could have chosen to ignore them, I didn't. Instead, I responded in a flirtatious manner myself. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't seem to control myself. I only messaged him when my husband wasn't around because I couldn't risk my husband finding out. I thought I was just having harmless fun with our texts, not doing anything terribly wrong. Then, one day, my husband and I had a major argument. He wanted to have a baby, but I had previously told him that I wasn't ready for parenthood. We had discussed this before, and I had been clear about not wanting a baby at this time. Raising a child comes with significant responsibilities, and I didn't believe I was prepared for that level of commitment. I tried explaining this to my husband, but he was too angry to listen. He said hurtful things, accusing me of running away from responsibilities due to my nature. His words deeply upset me, and he left the house to have some space. I was home alone, feeling upset and vulnerable after our fight. That's when George messaged me, asking if I wanted to meet for a drink. I hesitated at first, but the temptation was strong, so I agreed to see him. Since my husband needed space away from me, I felt it was fair for me to have some space as well. I thought it would be okay to meet with George under the circumstances. As I texted George, I made up my mind to meet him that night. We chose a bar located far from the university, on the outskirts of town, to minimize the chances of running into anyone who might recognize me there. The bar had a fantastic atmosphere, with dim lights and soft music creating the perfect setting for a night out. We indulged in drinks, and our conversation remained light and enjoyable. However, things began to spiral out of control as the night wore on. I ended up getting extremely drunk, ordering multiple shots of vodka. George remained with me throughout the night, and our flirting became more intense. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, and I momentarily forgot about the fight with my husband. It was a relief to escape the marital stress, even if only temporarily. The chemistry between George and me was undeniable, unlike anything I had experienced before. That night, I made a terrible mistake by cheating on my husband. Afterward, George walked me to my cab as we waited on the pavement. While we stood there, he kissed me. He gave me ample time and space to pull away, but I didn't. I kissed him back. I was so intoxicated that I didn't fully grasp the situation until the following morning when I woke up with a severe hangover. It took me some time to come to terms with the events of the previous night. The memory of my kiss with George rushed back, and I instantly thought, "Oh no, what have I done?" I left the bedroom and found my husband in the kitchen, appearing much calmer than the day before. He asked where I had been the previous night, and I told him I had gone out with my friends. He nodded and then apologized for the argument we had the day before. He reassured me that there was no rush to have a baby and that he'd give me all the time I needed to make that decision. He was eager to start a family, but he understood my concerns, overwhelmed by guilt for my actions the previous night. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had betrayed my husband's trust. While it was just a kiss, it weighed heavily on my conscience. I deeply regretted my mistake, but there was no way to undo it. I knew I had made a serious error in judgment, and the remorse was eating me up inside. I wanted to confess to my husband, but I was paralyzed by fear. I dreaded his reaction, fearing that he might discover my indiscretion and choose to leave me. I knew him well enough to understand that he wouldn't easily forgive something like this. Later, when I went back to my bedroom, I noticed text messages from George. He had messaged me the previous night, inquiring if I had arrived home safely. His texts also expressed his enjoyment of our kiss and a desire to meet again. I immediately blocked him, unable to bear the weight of my dishonesty any longer. The guilt of not being truthful with my husband continued to eat away at me. I loved him deeply, and the thought of breaking his heart with the truth was agonizing, yet I couldn't muster the courage to confess what had transpired between George and me. Every night, I lay in bed motionless, replaying the moment when I made my terrible mistake. The guilt and fear weighed on me like a physical burden, pressing down on my chest. I had been carrying this guilt since that fateful day, yet I still lacked the courage to confess to my husband. Each time I tried to speak the words, my throat seemed to constrict, silencing me. So I made the painful choice to keep my secret. In the following weeks, I attempted to appear normal in front of my husband. However, every touch, every kiss from him left me feeling like a fraud, as if I were deceiving him, living a lie. I found myself trapped in a state of guilt and fear, unable to escape. Then one day, George attended a seminar organized by my department. My husband was the guest speaker at the event. Seeing George filled me with dread, as he was aware of our shared secret and could expose the truth if he wished. Fortunately, he chose to remain silent and never acknowledged me in any way during his time on campus. While relieved that he hadn't revealed our secret, my guilt only intensified, lurking like a ticking time bomb ready to detonate at any moment. The inevitable day of reckoning arrived. It was a Monday morning, and I was running late for work. I had a meeting with a colleague, and I was already 10 minutes behind schedule. I hastily grabbed my bag and left the house, only to realize I had left my phone at home. Panic briefly overcame me, but I decided to continue to the university, accepting that I would be tardy for my meeting. I couldn't afford to turn back and risk further delays. My husband had no morning commitments and was planning to arrive separately for an afternoon meeting. Upon my arrival at the university, I rushed to my meeting, a sense of unease gnawing at me. Despite the meeting being productive, the feeling that something was amiss lingered. As soon as the meeting concluded, I hurried back to my office, my anxiety growing. After the meeting concluded, I hurriedly made my way to my office. Upon opening the door, a startling sight awaited me. My husband was seated at my desk, holding my phone and scrolling through my messages. I stood frozen, realizing that a reckoning was imminent. My small mistake had finally caught up with me. My husband raised his eyes to meet mine, a profound sense of betrayal etched in his gaze. At that moment, I felt like the greatest fool on earth. He rose from his seat and handed me my phone, his voice barely above a whisper as he questioned, "Why did you do it?" He had meticulously examined my text messages with George, reading our flirtatious exchanges, references to the kiss, and the content of our texts. I found myself utterly speechless, aware that there was no justification for my actions. All I could do was lower my head in shame and await the consequences. My husband explained how he had sensed something amiss in my behavior during the past few weeks, believing it was related to our disagreement about having a baby. Consequently, he had offered me space, assuming I was still upset. He expressed his disbelief, saying, "I never thought you'd betray me like this." He left my office without uttering another word, leaving me alone with my overwhelming guilt and shame. I recognized that I had irreparably damaged his trust, uncertain if I could ever regain it. For what felt like hours, I sat at my desk, numbed by shock and remorse. I had obliterated the most precious aspect of my life, my marriage, all due to a thoughtless kiss. Later, I returned home, compelled to clarify the situation with my husband, emphasizing my love for him. He sat on the living room couch, sipping his whiskey. Approaching him, I attempted to hold him, explaining what had occurred. However, he rebuffed my touch and pushed me away, his eyes filled with cold detachment and seething anger. I understood that I had deeply wounded him, and there seemed to be no way to make amends. An urgent need to elucidate the situation engulfed me. I confessed that the kiss had been a result of extreme intoxication, emphasizing it was merely a kiss. He regarded me with intense anger but remained silent before ultimately leaving the house. In the following days, my husband barely uttered a word to me. It was as if I had become invisible. Despite my pleas for forgiveness, he steadfastly avoided making eye contact or acknowledging me. I felt like a wandering ghost within our home, devoid of purpose. Weeks passed with us coexisting under the same roof, but seldom exchanging words. Despite my attempts to bridge the gap, he consistently rebuffed my advances, refusing even to meet my gaze. Every effort I made proved futile, including trying to embrace him while he slept, only to be met with rejection. Initially, I harbored hope that our relationship could mend through my persistent efforts to earn his forgiveness. I believed that we could discuss what had transpired and find a path forward. However, it appeared my husband had already made up his mind about the course of action he wanted to take. One day he approached me, expressing a desire to talk. I eagerly listened, hoping for a sign of forgiveness and a